Okay. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So thanks everybody for joining us. I appreciate it. And I'm really looking forward to hearing Dr. Templeman explain about the manufacturing process, etc. And I wanted Dee Dee and Dory, because I'm going to say this honestly. If anybody's going to take a look at the ingredients and tear it apart, it's these two girls in in the organization.
There you go.
I know. I've dealt with this for how many years, and it's okay because they feel like I do. We want to put the best ingredients in our body, and we want to promote the best. And so, having both of David and Dr. Templeman on the line, I really appreciate being able to answer our questions, because we're all in. Everybody that's on the call today, we are all in. This is our home, and we want to stay here. So, David, I'm going to pass it to you.
Thank you, and I appreciate the time here. And Pat, this all started. Pat gave me a call. She was talking about one of the ingredients in the products, and then we got to. I said we changed it to sodium benzoate, and she said, "Well, wait a second, that I don't like that one." And I'm like, "Wait a second." I said, "I have such faith in Dr. Templeman here, who was the mangosteen expert, one of the mangosteen experts around the world, and he's been really worked for one of the largest, fastest growing companies in our industry, has been employed by 8 other companies in this industry and outside as an expert." So I said, "Pat, I'm getting Dr. Templeman on the phone right now." And we actually got him, and it worked out, right, Pat? And Dr. Templeman has been through this at length with major companies and the industry. So, Dr. Templeman, I'll turn it over to you. I think, and I would really appreciate it if you gave people a little bit of your background and your expertise, so that they know that you are an incredible resource to xosialX. You have been since I've seen you when you came, and I've appreciated the relationship. You are always spot on, and I just want to help people understand the situation here. So I'll turn it back over to you.
Sure. And at any time you need clarification or you want me to be less verbose, because I tend to be, just interrupt and tell me what to do. Okay?
Yep.
So I'm old. I think that has both good and bad things. There's certainly the only thing that we keep accumulating as we live long time is experience. And I am drawing upon my experience in giving you my opinions today. But before I talk about ingredients or even preservatives, I want to acknowledge something really important. And that is that some of you may come to this conversation not just with opinions, but with lived experiences, sometimes very painful ones, around chemicals, drugs, illnesses, and even loss. And I don't see it as my job to dismiss that experience, that life experience, or argue with it. My role as a physician is to balance safety evidence and real-world practicality, especially when products move from small batches to large-scale use. And I think everybody on the call wants this to become large-scale use. And so we do have to talk about experience. And David has told you, I've worked for, I guess, maybe 8 companies. I've done this for, gosh, since 1995. It pretty much has been half of everything I've done. I am by training a family physician, and for the first 8 years of my career, because I'd previously been a marriage counselor, I did nothing but psychiatry, outpatient mood psychiatry. And that got depressing when they started making it into pill pushing, and I reverted back to the other qualifications that I had and worked in emergency rooms and in clinics for the rest of my life. I still am licensed to practice medicine in Utah, going through the process of recertifying myself for the next 2 years. And I continue to learn. And it's not that I know everything, even though I'm old. I know a very, very little bit, and I'm skeptical of experts wherever they are. So I don't wish to present myself necessarily as an expert, but someone who's trying to look at a problem that we're all facing and to validate the concerns which are real and to try and evaluate the risk as it exists. Because I guess the key message is that there is no such thing as a preservative-free liquid product that is sold at scale. All there are out there with the different companies are different risk profiles. And that's what we're actually discussing. What are we willing to do as far as a risk profile is concerned? So it could bring us to ask a basic question, which is why preservatives exist at all? Because and they do exist, because any water-based product is biologically unstable. And without reliable preservation, the real risks become bacterial or fungal growth, endotoxin formation, batch inconsistency, and silent contamination, which believe me can be often worse than an acute toxicity. So from a medical standpoint, microbial contamination is always a greater and more immediate risk than trace exposure to a regulated preservative. And, over the years, I have worked with companies who wanted to be as natural as possible because that's a good goal. And starting back in the early 2000s, I was tasked with looking at all of the natural preservatives that could exist so that the companies could evaluate whether they wanted to go with the things which are largely marketable across the globe, or are they something that would be excellent, they could use it and be safe. And what I noticed, because I went back and did that again for my current group just this last month or so, and what was fascinating is that all the niche products which existed back when I did this in the early 2000s, they're gone. They're just not here. They have, they've either been changed or disappeared, or things have just not gone well. And the landscape, the supplement market is littered with products that have disappeared, not because they were unsafe in theory, but because they were unreliable in practice. And therefore, the experience of what can happen when large numbers of people use different products is really, really important. I worked for, not the largest company I've worked for, but I worked for them worldwide. And I'll tell you, some of the side effects, the presumable side effects that came out of projects from Australia had me on the plane several times, certainly had me on the ropes a couple of times. And it's a difference you have to make the difference between something that occurs because of something in a product and something that occurs at the same time that a product is being taken. And that was really a knot that was hard to untie sometimes. So natural preservatives, they do fail over time or at scale. And grapefruit, I'll tell you about some of the ones that I've looked at, and they failed, and they're still out there, some of them, but they are not at scale. And that's grapefruit seed extract, because it's only an antimicrobial when it's adulterated with synthetic quats. And when I say synthetic quats, I'm talking about synthetic antifungals and antimicrobials. So really, grapefruit extract by itself just doesn't work. And many products have been reformulated or withdrawn after testing inconsistencies when grapefruit extract was the preservative. Citric acid, ascorbic acid alone. We tried this in one of our batches, and it did not work. And we did it because we wanted to try again to see if we could do it. And the reason why it doesn't work is it is not truly a preservative. It's a modifier of pH. And acidic products last much longer on the shelf. They're less hospitable to contamination. And generally, if you put enough citric acid or any particularly acid in a product, you're going to drop the pH, and that's going to reduce the risks, but it certainly doesn't eliminate them, because the citric acids fail very often against fungi and spore-forming bacteria. And we had a failure against a non-pathological, in other words, not dangerous to humans, but a fungi. Now, there are essential oil systems out there, but they have inconsistent batch potency, and they have taste issues and irritation issues in the mouth or in the gut. And there are lots of allergen concerns, and that's a really red flag for insurance. If you decide to use an essential oil system as your preservative, your insurance is going to be a lot higher than someone who doesn't. So the concerns in the real world are not simply efficacy, they are also, their practicality. Can you be insured appropriately so that your company's not going to disappear because of suits? And believe me, I've seen that in the past. Companies rocked to their bases because of suits which have arisen because of ingredients that they chose, and then they weren't safe enough. And the final category, and this is the one that's mostly changed since I did it in the early 2000s, is things that are called proprietary natural blends. And frankly, they have limited shelf life. They have vendor instability. In other words, you may tie yourself to a vendor and be buying from him only to find that, in a year or 2 years, that vendor's not available and you can't even get the same product. And then you're, the only thing that you can change that would be more dangerous than doing this would be to change your compensation plan, in my experience in multi-level marketing. So you want something that can be counted on and that you're going to be able to access in reasonable ways at reasonable costs with reasonable risks. And these products, they just come and go after recalls and formulations. And so the things I would like to emphasize that are in favor of, and I'll open a little parenthesis right here, in favor of sodium benzoate, is that when I've worked for natural product companies, I have been the bulwark of the company very, very often against the medical establishment and the scientific establishment, who are believers, absolute believers in randomized controlled double-blind trials as the gold standard for determining safety and efficacy of products that are given to human beings. And I argued with them that most of the products that we were presenting had tremendous history, that they were part of a traditional medical paradigm someplace in the world, and that they hadn't been used for decades only. They'd been used for centuries. And they weren't used by people who were wacky and who would hurt themselves. They were used by common sense people who didn't keep on using something, one, that didn't work, and two, that was dangerous. So the best argument for natural products really is that we've been using them for centuries, and that it makes sense in the strongest way in talking about evidential concerns that these are safe and they work, and we don't have to really prove that again, although in fact we do, in order to be able to get customers. But that's there. Now, that kind of an argument can't be made for sodium benzoate, but we're getting to where we can make a pretty convincing argument, because the first time that sodium benzoate was used as a preservative was in drinks in the late 1800s, where they were using acid drinks, and the sodium benzoate took the acid taste away from the drink, and so it was used not necessarily as a preservative, but as a taste modifier. Then starting in about 1900, and that's a long time ago, that's more than a century, it was used, and it was used widely. So it wasn't used just in one country, and today it's not used in one country. It's not used in one system. It's got global exposure, and it is used by all different paradigms in terms of food and drink around the world. And part of the reason for that is because it's water soluble, it's very predictable, it's effective at very low concentrations, which, for example, the natural products are not, especially not ascorbic acid. And it's easily measurable and it's audible. And so I think you're not exaggerating when you say that from a regulatory and an insurance standpoint, sodium benzoate is one of the most thoroughly characterized preservatives that the world has known. And I'm not going to cite authorities like the FDA, because for me they're a curse and a byword. It's an awful organization, but it is certainly approved this as GRAS, meaning generally safe for human usage, for over a century, before it began. So I think that when we talk about sodium benzoate and people are worried, they've had a personal experience or they've heard of the worst case scenario. And in the case of sodium benzoate, much of the fear around it traces back to very specific conditions, typically involving high heat, certain vitamin C combinations, and storage extremes. And these conditions are controlled for in modern formulation and manufacturing. The presence of a theoretical risk cannot be equated to real-world exposure at harmful levels, because it's very simple. Hazard is not the same as risk. And when you say that, it's important to recognize that everything virtually in the whole world can be a hazard used improperly. So a toothpick can become a hazard in the wrong hands and with the wrong intentions. Oxygen, which we absolutely need to live, is a paradox. Get too much of it and you've got a big problem. Water. I've had patients and indeed one relative who spent time in an ICU because they had too much water in their body. And in one case, the lady had simply drunk the water. The other one was complicated by antidiuretic hormone. But nonetheless, even water is dangerous being used appropriately. So because the topic can be emotional, I'd like to later on moderate questions so that everyone gets heard and we don't get stuck on a single point. But the things that really I want to make sure happen is that I don't want to dispute anybody's experience. Where clinicians have to be careful, as I mentioned, in separating what happened from what caused it, especially when multi-exposures are involved, and that's usually the case with the kind of products we're talking about. So I feel very comfortable defending David's products and defending the preservatives that are used, or in this case, the preservative that is used to make it acceptable to insurance, safe for people, and to have a shelf life that makes it practical. And therefore, let's move on to questions.